Hey, good morning, friends. It's Nick Mulbauer here. And this morning I was restringing one of my crappie rods, and I thought, heck, while I'm restringing it, I guess I could kind of talk about the only two crappie rods I have. I would love to have more, but as I mentioned in the last video, I don't like spending money if I don't have to, and over the course of several years, two rods has suited me just fine. So I'll give you guys a breakdown of the only two crappie rods I use, and I'll jump right into it. The first rod I have here is a Pflueger President reel paired with a Shakespeare Micro Series rod, and on there I have a Bobby Garland Baby Shad blue ice color. And I just tied this color on this morning because I'm going to get out Sunday morning, and the low is going to be 27 and the high is 47 on Sunday. So I'm going to be out fishing in the morning. It's going to be cloudy, so with the cloudy, cool weather, I want a cool color. You know, we got a blue on there, and I'm probably going to fish in, it's going to be sort of low light situation, especially early in the morning, and then once the sun comes up, as long as those clouds stay in place, it's going to diffuse that sunlight quite a bit. So the degrees Kelvin, that's how you measure the degree of light or the temperature of light. It's going to be a cool day, so we're going to use a cool color. That'll look correct, I believe, in the water, and I think that color will, I'm hoping, I mean, the only reason I would switch it out is if the water clarity isn't what I'm thinking it's going to be, but since it's early spring, I'm hoping that the water clarity is pretty clear. I'm hoping 2 feet visibility, and I think that this will just kind of stand out just enough, but not too much, and that's kind of what I'm always shooting for. So I think that blue ice color is going to be a good color come Sunday morning. So if not, I'll switch it out and vary it depending on what I think I need to do. So we'll just see what the day brings. But I have this reel. I have this reel filled up with 4-pound monofilament, and the reason I like having monofilament is because with this crappie rod, I like to toss it out and just kind of fan cast brush piles. So I'll usually get an idea of what the depth of the brush pile is, and I will toss out, count it down, and then I will just drift that lure over that brush pile. So the monofilament is a floating line, so for me it's easier to gauge how deep I am with mono compared to fluorocarbon. So I have it paired up with mono line, and I can count that jig down to the depth I need and just drift it over that. The reason why I have a more limber rod is basically because I like to fight a crappie. I prefer to fight a crappie with, or any kind of panfish, with a limber rod if I can. So I like to have that with the limber tip. You know, crappie have a very, they have that paper thin mouth we all know of, and I feel like that the limberness of the rod kind of gives me a little bit more give, you know, and I won't tear that hook out of a crappie's mouth as easy with a limber rod tip. So that's what I got for there. Like I said, it's a Pflueger President reel with a Shakespeare Micro Series super limber rod, and then I mean, I changed the lure color up quite a bit, but looking at Sunday's conditions, I think that might be a good color to start with, especially in the lower light. Once the sun comes up, I might get something a little darker, but we'll start with that color. Okay, my second rod I have here, this one I'll probably talk about a little bit more. So this one I got a Pflueger Purist spinning reel on, and it's a bit lower end compared to a President reel, but I've used this for probably 4 or 5 seasons now, and it has served me just fine. And I don't know if this is going to happen with some of my President, but there's a bit of, that's kind of wearing out, the bail is wearing out, but nonetheless, it still pops open and closes shut like it should really well. And yeah, so I don't have many complaints about it. My only real complaint about this reel is that there's no sound when you pull the drag. There's no drag sound, and you know, I've gotten really used to that with this reel, so it's not that big a deal, but I really kind of like to hear that drag buzz when a fish is taking off with it. So not too big a deal in this case, but I would prefer to have the reel buzzing when a fish is making a run, which crappie and bluegill, if they go on a run, it's usually pretty short. I have this actually paired with a more rigid, I believe it's an MHX blank. My friend Mark Johnson makes these rods, and he hand ties all the guides on them, and he's been gracious enough to let me try these rods out. So in the beginning I wasn't as used to that more rigid tip, but I have found a good reason for it to use it. And the deal is that with the rigid rod tip, I like to use it for wrenching crappie out of brush piles. With the other rod, I have that lure above the brush piles. With this rod, I generally have the lure in the brush piles. So with that more limber tip paired with fluorocarbon line, can't even see it, paired with that fluorocarbon line, fluorocarbon has less stretch, well, not less stretch than mono, but it takes more weight to stretch fluorocarbon. So the rigid rod tip with fluorocarbon is great for wrenching crappie out of deep brush piles. So generally I don't have a lure tied onto this, but I like this combination for vertical jigging. Like I said, a lot of times I am not fishing outside the brush pile when I'm vertical jigging. I generally try to start outside the brush pile, but a lot of times I have to be in the brush pile, and it's just a lot easier yanking those crappie out with this fluorocarbon and more stiff tip, I have found. So vertical jigging, I also like the rigid tip for the feel, that crappie thump. I can really feel that thump when I'm vertical jigging with fluorocarbon and a rigid rod tip. The snare I use this with just as much as vertical jigging, this combination, is I use a slip bobber. Again, I usually fish a slip bobber with a live minnow on just a plain Aberdeen gold wire hook, split shot, and a lot of times as well that minnow will be sunk right into that brush pile. It won't be above it. You know, sometimes I usually start above it or to the side of a brush pile, but a lot of times I end up being right in that brush pile where I get my most consistent bite. So again, with those crappie being deep in that brush pile, I like to just have the fluorocarbon and rigid tip to just wrench those crappie out of that brush pile as fast as I can get them. And then I can play them once I'm out of that, but generally I like to set the hook on them, lightly set the hook on them, wrench them out of there initially, and then I will just play them once they're out of the brush pile. That being said, crappie still have a paper thin mouth, and I don't like to play them too hard, so I do have the drag set pretty light on this rod. I mean, right now it's kind of tight, but I do have the drag set pretty loose so that, you know, it still allows me to play them a bit. You know, it doesn't give them, you know, it has a little bit of give again. So yeah, that's my crappie setup. Those two rods, I exclusively fish those two rods for crappie, and I've been doing it for probably 2 or 3 years now. And I can probably buy, you know, I could probably stand to buy one more crappie rod, but that's probably all I would ever need. You know, I guess the only advantage it might give you is if you have multiple rods, you can just have them already rigged up with various lures, and then you can just toss it instead of having to tie. That's the only kind of downside of only having 2 crappie rods, is if I decide I need to change a color or change something up, I have to retie. I can't just grab another rod and get going. But you know, my situation too, I only have a kayak. I don't have a boat with tons of rods sitting on the deck. I just have my kayak, and I usually travel pretty light because I don't have a lot of surface area on my kayak for gear and lures, etc., etc. So 2 rods, simple enough, works great. And yeah, see you guys next time. Have a good one, guys.